Hi, everybody. Today I'd like to do my first webinar ever, and I want to talk about injury management for runners. My name is Jonathan Pratt. So a little bit about me, I started coaching runners at West Ferris Secondary School back in 2004. I had just completed high school, first year of university, and we had a cross-country team, but no track team. So in the spring, I decided to go out and coach track, and I've been coaching ever since. I also coach with the North Bay Legion Track Club, and we focus on summer cross-country group leading into the fall. Back in high school and university, I developed a lot of different injuries, Achilles tendinopathy, shin splints, plantar fasciitis, all the usual running injuries. And it just cut out so much of my training time, a sport that I love to do, pretty addicted to it. And I wanted to find ways that I could prevent these injuries and be able to both perform better, but spend more time doing something that I loved. In 2011, I started my own business, Pratt's Pro Fitness, gym that focused on building strength to keep athletes in the game and improving the function of adult clients. So why do my runners have such a low injury rate? We haven't had a runner with shin splints for years. We don't have the regular running injuries, the Achilles tendinopathy, IT band syndrome, stuff like that. We occasionally do have minor aches and pains, but we rarely have to have a kid miss a meet. This year we had one kid that missed one or two meets, but it's pretty rare. Some of the injuries where we had to skip runners out of a meet, we had a kid tear an MCL while we were playing a team building game. So that's not really running related, a little bit harder to prevent, but we'll just go over how we manage training load, periodization, individualization, what we do for supplementary training, and then a few other tips after that. Most studies show that 70% of runners will develop an injury during the time of the study. That's pretty high. That's higher than most sports. And most of these injuries are chronic injuries because of an accumulation of excessive training volume or intensity, rather than an acute injury like an ACL tear or hamstring strain. So why might runners be injured? Well, we do thousands of repetitions each day with little variation in how we do them. It's one type of movement, running. We're not moving from side to side or in reverse, and we move through a low range of motion. Some of us also have an addiction to running. We just don't want to take days off when things hurt. We're also pretty tough people. Study comparing strength powerlifters to run endurance athletes showed that while the strength athletes had a had a higher threshold to pain, the endurance athletes had a higher tolerance to pain. So we're able to push through even if it might be detrimental to our long-term running. So load management is just how we manage volume and intensity and training frequency. I'm not sure who made this quote, but your best ability is availability. So it's great to work on running economy and strength and cardiovascular endurance, but if we're injured all the time, it doesn't matter how high any of those qualities are, it's going to affect us in the long term with our development. Great quote from Harry Mara, who was a decathlete coach, perhaps one of the best coaches ever. He coached Ashton Eaton to a world record and Olympic and world gold medals in the decathlon, and coached his wife as well, Brianne Thyssen-Eaton, also a decathlon medalist. It's better to be 100% healthy and 80% fit than to be 80% healthy and 100% fit. So again, we want to focus on being injury-free rather than how many miles a week we can run and how many interval training sessions we're doing. Minimum effective dose is a concept I learned from Mike Boyle. It's actually from, it's a medical term. And what it's talking about here is that if you can imagine you had to take a medication for symptoms, and 100 units of the medication treated the symptoms, but then you decided to take double that dose. Well, you're not going to get any better results, but you'd have a higher risk of side effects from this. And the same goes for training. This doesn't mean that I don't believe in running high volumes. The highest volume I've ever programmed for an athlete was up to 100 miles in a week, and that was for a fourth or fifth year university cross-country runner who had progressed through the years slowly and with few injuries along the way. So it's just about programming the right training load for the right individual. In science, in the research, we talk about the acute to chronic workload ratio, and that's basically your acute workload is the amount of training you're doing in a day or a week versus how much you're doing over a period of time, weeks or months. And so we don't want to see a spike in that training load. You've probably heard of the 10% rule, where you don't want to increase your mileage by more than 10% per week. It's not really a hard, fast rule. With one of my athletes, the one that I said who ran up to 100 miles in a week, if he took a week off of training at the end of a season, he could start back the first week and he could do 40 miles per week. And then the second, that was 6 runs for the week. And then the next week he could run twice a day for most of the days and getting 60. And then maybe a week of 70, then we'd cut back for a week and then build 70, 75, 80. So those are bigger jumps, but you think 40 miles is only 40% of his training load and 60 miles, 60%. So, but when progressing from in the higher volumes closer to his max, it might be even less than 10%. So we want to avoid not necessarily high volume. It's just that we don't want to see weekly spikes in that volume or intensity. A lot of the reason people that are against high volume will say that that's the reason for injuries, but you have to look at intensity too. And we can certainly run too much volume in a single session, whether it be a long run or too many intervals, maybe 400-meter intervals where your technique is breaking down and you're continuing to run and push through it. And going back to not being against high volumes, moderate to high chronic workloads is actually shown to be protective against injury. So if you're regularly running, say, 75 miles per week, and you go to a training camp where there's a spike in volume and intensity, that's going to be protective versus somebody who's only doing half that volume. Another point that I wanted to talk about is just because you have a high level of cardiovascular conditioning doesn't mean that you're necessarily ready to run at high volumes. And so if you were doing cross-country skiing over the winter, or you were out on cycling all summer, you might be really fit, but Then you come into the track season or the cross country season in the fall, and you cut back way back on those other activities, and you dramatically increase your running volumes. And that's what happened to one of my runners. He was cycling to work all summer, 30 kilometers per day, and he was super fit when he came into the fall. And I assigned him a workout where send him out for some hill repeats, and I was working with another group, and I think I only want him to do 6 hill repetitions. He comes back, says, man, I was able to do all 12. Well, I hadn't explained to him the reason why I wanted him to do less. I only want him to do half the volume, even though he was quite capable of doing all 12. And then by the weekend, the meet on the weekend, or maybe perhaps the week after, he had severe shin splints, and he wasn't able to finish his first race. So we had to adjust the training after that. Another concept that I've learned from Mike Boyle is the does it hurt concept. So there's only a yes or no answer to this. You can't say, well, it doesn't hurt anymore after I warm up for 10 minutes, or it only hurts at the end of a run or under certain conditions. If it starts to hurt, Mike would recommend you're just going to stop the session and go home. I often feel an ache or pain like in my foot, and a couple minutes later it's gone, and I don't experience that pain for months. But if somebody is reporting knee pain to me, we're going to modify that training session, and then if it persists over the next couple days, then we're going to modify the training program, maybe take some days off, and I'm going to recommend going to see a physiotherapist. So the next concept I want to talk about is individualization. We want to fit the program to the runner, not the runner to the program. And we have such a wide diversity of runners at West Ferris. We get provincial medalists. We've had a couple of those. But then we've also had the slowest runner in the race. And so I have to modify the program for everybody. So we don't have one set training volume. If I can get my runners that are only showing up for the 8 to 10 week fall season, or in the spring after the snow melts, well, if they can get up to 4 30-minute runs in a week, that might be a good start. And are they ready to perform at their best with this training volume? No, but they're not going to get injured, and hopefully they're going to start to enjoy the running, and then I can encourage them to come out and do some fall or winter training and build them up slowly and get them up to higher training loads. So we train differently for our team sport athletes as well. In the fall, we have junior girls basketball running at the same time as cross country. So I have to manage the training load that they've done in basketball on top of their cross country training. And it might I used to get annoyed with kids having to leave early to go to basketball practice, but it's really a blessing in disguise. So we might just do one bush loop, and that might be 15 minutes and for the day, and then we send them home. We're also not giving them long tempo runs. These athletes are moderate to high in fast twitch muscle fibers, which helps them be successful in basketball, allows them to sprint fast and jump well and change directions quickly. And so they're not able to handle the long tempo runs based on their physiology, but also it's hard to maintain good form for a Daniel style threshold run or cruise intervals. So we're more shorter interval based, so 30 to 60 second intervals with equal or rest and jog in between, and they can get that fairly modest heart rate versus the high intensity interval training. So it's similar type of cardiovascular training to a threshold run, but it's more based on what their genetic makeup is. And Then for some of the kids that are coming out for maybe the 8 weeks, they might not have done any training or any sports over the summer. So for them, it's a slow buildup, but we might have days where we don't do any continuous running. We might do a drill like A skips for 10 repetitions and then jog to the end of the minute, and then maybe we do a side shuffle and then jog to the end of the minute. So we're not doing all this continuous running, and in that way they can take during the rest sections, they can focus a little bit more on their technique. And I might have multiple different units, excuse me, where I'm talking with them in between those sections and looking to see how they feel, and building up their cardiovascular system by doing other activities other than running. But I can also develop their tissues in a more progressive manner. There's another term, a term that we can learn from this weight training is technical failure. So if you can lift a weight 10 times, but then on the 9th repetition, your technique starts to break down and you can squeeze out one more ugly rep, that 9th rep is where you had technical failure. So you wouldn't want to train past that technical failure to get that 10th rep, higher risk of injury. And we can apply that to running as well. So if I've assigned, say, 10 times 500 meters with 90-second rest in between, if if they've gone out really fast and their technique is starting to break down, then I'm going to pull the workout short, or perhaps I'm going to have them skip some of the intervals in between, give them longer rest, and help them to adjust their training, their pacing. The one problem with running is, particularly at slow paces, is that your body is really good at compensating for poor movement. So this is great if you're get injured when you're lost out in the woods. You're going to survive. You're going to be able to get yourself out of there because you have muscles that are going to take over the injured muscles. And this might be great if you were in the Olympic marathon and you had a kilometer to go and something cramped up and you had to limp your way into the finish, but maybe you still got a medal out of it. This isn't something that we want to get to doing on a regular basis in workouts. So particularly with the long run, it's easy to go an extra 30 minutes, even if your technique is breaking down. And at that point, you would just walk home from there would be a good option. So periodization is a fancy term, which is just planning your volume and intensity and training frequency over time. Now, the traditional model in running that you might be familiar with is Arthur Lydiard's training, and he suggested 10 weeks or more of marathon type training, which is very high in volume, long run up to 22 miles. And then there was a hill phase where you would run hills 3 times a week. Then there was an interval phase, and finally a coordination phase. So there was a big concentration of one type of training over each of the phases. But newer models have shifted more to a concurrent training model where you train every quality at the same time. Now that doesn't mean that every quality gets to train to the same extent or to the same importance. We're changing that emphasis over time. So we train all qualities all the time, only the emphasis changes over time. In a 2-week period, we're going to do a 1 or 2 long runs. We're going to train some type of threshold workout, whether it's cruise intervals or a continuous tempo. And this is going to depend on the event that we're training for, and where we are in relation to a peak event. We're going to train intervals between 3 to 5 or 3 to 10K pace, and we're going to do some type of repetition or interval training in the 800 to 1500 meter pace, or on hills. We also sprint and we lift weights, and we do multi-directional training, so moving in a lot of different directions. So what this model does for us is it allows us to avoid spikes in volume or intensity. We don't have to put an emphasis on only long, slow distance, or an emphasis in later parts of the season on purely interval training. Another concept that we can learn from science is training monotony. So what's monotony? So if something that's boring is monotonous, how we compare that with use that in fitness is that if your training has very little change throughout the week, it's described as monotonous. And if we have more variation, it's less monotonous. And training monotony is associated with a higher risk of injury and more possibly even a lower results out of it. So I like to use a 2-week rollover through much of the season. So in the off season, we'll do week 1 will be some type of threshold workout. Workout 2 in the first week will be running at intervals or some type of fartlek 3 to 10K pace, a long run on the weekend. And then week 2, the first workout will be again some type of threshold workout, and then hills for workout 2, and then we have a decrease in training volume for the rest of the week. We also train short to long for a lot of qualities. So while we focus on aerobic development with low intensities early in the season and eventually get to lower volume with higher intensity, when we introduce a quality such as interval training at 3 to 10K pace, we're going to have a low volume of that training. So say your goal workout, your key workout for 5K is going to be 5 times 1,000 meters with 90-second rest. We might start out with only 6 to 8 times 400 meters with that 90-second rest. And in that way, we're going to grow the volume over time and increase the challenge. But with this low volume of this quality, we can get it in early. We don't have to see a spike in intensity later. And a lot of runners experience injury under the traditional model. They were like, we were in great shape coming in, and then we added speed workout or interval training if you prefer, and we had a lot of injuries from that. So how do we use supplementary training? We lift weights 1 to 2 times per week with the high school group, and our more serious runners are doing this most year round. Resistance training or strength training, if you prefer, has been shown to dramatically reduce both chronic, sorry, I screwed that up, both chronic and acute injuries. And you don't need a lot of work to do it. While my clients that come to my gym are doing up to 1-hour sessions, my high school group, we warm up for a little bit, and then we do as little as 10 minutes, and that's pretty much common. So we'll do Mike Boyle's 1 dumbbell workout. Every kid grabs a dumbbell, and we'll do a body weight jump for 2 sets of 5. And then we'll go and we'll pair up a split squat or lunge variation with a dumbbell rowing variation. for 5 to 10 repetitions of each, alternate between the two for two circuits of that. And then we'll pair up a single leg deadlift with a push-up or a dumbbell overhead press variation. And that, again, that only takes up 10 minutes of our time. But we're also doing stuff, mobility and core and various prehab type exercises. And we're doing that for 3 to 5 minutes before every single run. So it's common to think, well, I'm just going out for an easy run, so I don't need to warm up for it. When we do these 3 to 5 minute exercises, we feel better when we're out there. I've noticed a big difference with it. We're also sprinting. It's not really supplementary because it's also running, but the great thing about sprinting is you're taking your limbs through a greater range of motion. And I mentioned before that the problem with running is that we move through such a limited range of motion. So sprinting will help open up our hips. And there's research out of J.B. Morin's lab about how sprinting 2 or 3 times per week can help with with hamstring injuries. We also do multi-directional workout pretty much every practice. So we're moving side to side and backwards. And where this work comes in is it's going to improve the strength of various tendons, ligaments in our joints, and it's also going to train some weak muscles that are going to help in stabilization. And if for nothing else, Peter Coe's, one of his books, he mentioned, wouldn't it be a shame if you got injured because you slipped on the ice? And we certainly, if we don't have ice during our season, we have mud and lots of mud in the cross-country season. So this multi-directional work can just help prevent us from developing injury from slipping. So a few other tips. When we're on the track, we often alternate directions, or because turning left all the time is just pretty stressful on the body. So not always on the track, but we have a park that we like to run at, particularly in the fall. And we're usually running clockwise when we're at the park, or alternating directions there. When we're not running, if we're using the track and we're running at slower than race pace, we're going to go and run in the opposite direction for that. And we also slowly progress to full workouts on the track. We've got a lot of snow over the winter, and it's usually not until mid-April before the track is cleared off. We're lucked out this year with it coming clean early, but we don't have a season, unfortunately. So what we're doing is, once the track is clear, the first workout isn't even a workout. We're just at the end of an easy run, we'll come out on the track and run 3 200s progressively faster, one at 3,000 pace, the next one at 1,500 pace, the third one at 800 meter pace. And this just gives us a little introduction to the track, get our bodies used to running left, so we're not having a spike in the coming weeks with that. We also can do aerobic cross training, particularly if you're already injured. So spending time on a bike or elliptical trainer can help supplement your running volume. There's a study that I'm familiar with where runners cut back on their running volume and supplemented with cycling, and they were able to maintain their running ability over 5K for quite some time. And that's what I noticed with the guy I was training for triathlon, focused on a half marathon for the spring, and then as we ramped up his cycling and his swimming, cut back on his running to 2 or 3 times per week, he was able to maintain his running fitness while improving fitness in the other events. One strategy I used with an 800-meter runner who had some injuries, I had built her up to 4 days of running per week, but there was also 2 days a week where we did some type of aerobic circuit training. Should do some type of low impact exercise like a split squat for 10 repetitions, and then while she was resting, she would do some type of physiotherapy corrective exercise. And I learned this idea from Eric Cressy. He had a baseball pitcher doing this, and so we would do 2 exercises paired together, 3 sets of 10, and we could build the session up to 20 or 30 minutes of cardiovascular conditioning, maintaining a heart rate of 120 to 150 beats per minute with that. So to summarize, we want to avoid spikes in training load. We train all qualities all the time. We progress from short to long on all qualities. We fit the training to the individual, and we include lots of supplementary training. So that's how we prevent injuries in my groups with West Ferris and the North Bay Legion Track Club. Thank you. If you want to learn more about me or the services I offer, visit my website at prattsprofitness.com. It has my blog on that as well. You can follow me on Facebook, Pratts Pro Fitness, or on Instagram at Pratts Pro Fitness, and Twitter at Pratts Pro Fitness. Thank you.